Yes, as Roger said, I did work with Guy. Did anybody see last year's presentation? Okay. This is going to be a continuation of that. As a matter of fact, I wore the same shirt, so there's lots of continuity. And anyway, so I lived in New York City for decades. And the good part about that, among other things, is that I lived close enough to Guy Obolensky to be up in his upstate New York laboratory over many years, of course, and learned a lot from him about faster-than-light phenomena, which was his thing. His crusade at first was truth in measurement. He had a big problem with the U.S. military when he discovered they were using false measurement systems to pass their tests for military procurement. And they basically, not to go into that, he got a lot of trouble with them. He didn't get any more military contracts, and then he decided he'd just get enough money up and continue his own research into faster than light in the 50s, 60s, 70s in his laboratory up there in Sloatsburg, New York, which is about an hour north of New York City. He developed this apparatus that allowed him to prove that there was faster than light wave phenomenon, electrical, right? That device then morphed over many years into a healing device that he called the Teslatron. Now, the Teslatron is a particular component in the system of many components, and we're going to go into a little bit of that. John came to last year's conference, you may remember, and he was so impressed, or we were impressed with him, and we got along really well, and he lives nearby in Connecticut in the U.S., and so now he is on our team, so he is a bona fide electrical engineer with lots of degrees, and he'll prove that to you right now. And then he'll describe the basics of conventional electrodynamics as it's understood and everybody agrees with, basically. And then I'm just going to take it over into Obolensky's applications of those, into the healing technology. And then in the end, if there's time permitting, I want to make a mention of Preston Nichols, who passed away in October 5th, and Duncan Cameron, who passed away just recently. These people were involved in the Montauk project. You may remember Preston Nichols. Now, I'm not going to go into the Montauk project at all, because what's important to me is to give homage to Preston, especially, because he was a genius. He was quirky, obviously, and controversial, but in a good way. And I want to describe his devices, which we also plan to reproduce. And that is his mind amplifier and his sound system. So I know Paul's jumping at the bit to get into that. So take it away, John.
All right, so my name's John Cappelletti. Like he said, he introduced me already, but my mission is to apply conventional science to try to explain what these great inventors have done, because they're usually working on the next latest and greatest idea in their head, and when they start talking, they're not really aware of other people aren't on the same page quite yet, and they've already done a lifetime of work that allowed them to develop their ideas. So we're going to start with the people, the important people that have taught me or helped me get to where I am right now, or gave me a lot of information. We started with Dan Winter. You should know Dan Winter. That's why we're all here. Guy Obolensky was the inventor of the Teslatron, so he's very important. Allan Rhode was Guy's protege. Paul Harris, obviously, he's also here. He's involved in this project too. And then I have some of the most well-known electrotherapeutics references, Robert Becker and Jerry Tennant, which are also friends. Then all the next people are either electrical engineers or physicists that study electrodynamics. So these are the people that I've used to develop my theories. And also Robert Harlick specifically, he's involved too. He helps us out a little bit. The rest of the people are just, if you want to look them up and find out more information. And if anybody wants references, I can give you all the books that I've studied and extra papers. So there's a lot more information. You can just ask me after the talk.
That William Lyon is central to our hydrogen project, wasn't it, Paul? The original monotone of hydrogen work, William Lyon, I think. That's very important.
Yeah, he's good. Okay, so the overview. We're going to talk about what the Teslatron is and also talk about time domain waves in space. So this is important because electrical engineers usually eliminate time and space from the equations, and they don't actually see how the wave changes as it flows through space and changes in time. We're going to talk about shock waves, solitons, transmission lines. These are all physics and electrical engineering concepts. Then that's going to lead into how the wave actually couples into the body and how the body is a part of the machine. At the end, we're going to talk a little bit about ether flows. Every wave needs a medium to travel through, and we believe in the ether as a real thing. So we're going to talk about that a bit. So first of all, what was Guy actually doing with this thing? He was a scientist primarily, and he was studying faster than light experiments. He used sophisticated measurement techniques, which are mainstream science. He also studied high-power energy resonance in very special and unique ways. These are not typical resonance effects, and he always said a phase conjugate mirror is essential for his machine, which Dan talks about.
And more today.
Yes. This showed a lot of anomalous effects that he reported, but that was a long time ago, and it was not so clear, and so we want to reproduce the effects and see how all that works. The last part is the biological healing. He actually found out by putting human subjects in the machine, a lot of people had healing effects that really helped them, and we're going to talk more about that later. Well, actually, right now. Do you want to explain some?
Well, I'm going to interject occasionally with John.
Incidentally, Roger helped do the visits to the Teslatron, and that helped inspire what Paul and I did with Theraphi. And I worked with Obolensky for some years, quite a long time myself, and learned about fast sunlight working with his toy.
So maybe Dan can even talk more about this himself better than I can, but some of the things that I've heard from people after talking to around a dozen people that have been in the machine, they say the acupuncture points on the body were illuminated by the field. And I have no idea why that happens. So maybe someone else knows more.
It's a very high voltage corona, and the places that are dielectrically, high dielectric and longitudinally embeddable will attract more charge, literally. And the lower resistance of acupuncture meridians is well documented.
Well, there you go. They did have some physicians that confirmed some of the results. So that was very important for me to know. And probably a lot of you know about negative ion therapy and how beneficial that is. So the free radicals are neutralized, and a lot of inflammation is caused by free radical damage. The next part is bone and cell growth. So Jerry Tennant was already mentioned, and Robert Becker, a lot of you probably know, studied the effects of electric fields on cell growth. And specifically, Jerry Tennant showed that cells dedifferentiate into something that I consider a stem cell. I'm not a biologist, but the cells dedifferentiate and they can turn into something else. So that's an effect that they saw.
Yeah, Becker showed that a negative voltage bias DC would increase the time at which a tadpole's tail would regenerate. Basically, so the cells would regenerate even after they normally would not, consistently with a little DC bias. Just simply DC opposed it. And yeah, BB I didn't know so well. I knew Becker well and Tennant well.
Yeah, also another thing is bone disunions, where somebody would have a broken bone that wouldn't heal for literally decades. They've had a completely broken apart bone. And they apply an electric voltage to one side, positive, the other side, negative, and the bone actually will regrow and heal itself.
William, you were working with that guy with that bone issue. And the Theraphi wasn't quite, we should look at that. I see.
We didn't have the negative positive
That's
aspect.
right, that's right, the lady. Yeah.
The voltage, how high is its peak?
Oh, I'm not sure, but it's in these books. The body electric and healing is voltage.
Doesn't take a lot, but DC originally, and later pulse.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about actually what the Teslatron is. It's a spark gap switch, but it's a very complicated type of spark gap switch. So we're going to start with some simple versions. First one is you just have a single spark gap. It can be open and closed, so it's a switch. That's its electrical function. This represents the switch being open. There's no plasma. The plasma actually is what connects the two sides of the circuit. So that would be a closed switch. Now you can have two of these in series, one right after the other, and that's a special condition where the second switch will break down faster and will speed up the rise time of the wave. And we're going to talk about the rise time later. Next, you get to the Tesla switch. So Tesla, this is a picture from one of Tesla's actual books that he wrote. And it shows multiple spark gaps in series. So if you put even more of these, the rise time of the wave will increase at each stage. And this is a very fundamental concept in the Teslatron.
Tesla learned from the arc. That arc couples with the plasma. Remember when I showed you the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant? Well, they call that arc for a reason. And that arc, then the waves propagate longitudinally potentially. Tesla started with the carbon arc. That was his magic.
Mm-hmm. So these are to show that you can create very complicated machines with multiple spark gaps that do many different things. One example is a Marx generator, which maybe you know about, but if not, you can look at that some other time. So like I said, it sharpens the rising edge of the wave, and it allows the plasma to extinguish itself faster so you can have a higher repetition rate, which may be important in an application for if you want to do a high frequency application to a person. So the next important thing is where and when is the wave, where's the energy, where is it going, how does it move back and forth. Some of the fundamental properties, like I said, is rise time and wavelength and the speed. So here's the difference between a time domain wave and a frequency domain wave. This is really a mathematical concept, but you can represent waves, as Dan always shows, with a spectrum. So you have these different frequencies, and all these frequencies combine to make up the time domain wave. So you can have square waves, but you can analyze it as a sequence of harmonics, which you guys already know about.
Just another way of saying that every complex wave can be summarized as a series of sine waves. Every wave in the universe is simply sine waves that are added together. The other point is that square wave, he talks about rise time, what he's saying is how square is that wave? If it's perfectly square, there's an infinite number of harmonics. If it's perfectly sine, there's only one harmonic, and everywhere in between, and that's what you tune to embed and resonate. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so over here it actually shows the definition. Mathematically, the rise time is 10% to 90%, but that's not really that important. That's a transient wave, and this is a sine wave. So the problem that people run into when they do frequency domain analysis is you have to assume you know what the wave is going to be at all times in the future. But a time domain analysis will allow you to actually see how the energy flows from one place to another. So that's the type of analysis that I focus on. So the wavelength. This is important because if you're roughly the same size as the wave will interact with you much differently than if you're very small. And Dan mentioned this before with the tsunami example. A tsunami could go through where you are and you won't even notice because the wave size is so long, you can ride up and down and you don't even know it's there. And that would be the case with this. You have a tiny boat on a very large wave, and if you zoom in, the water is pretty much flat. So that's an important concept. So now I have some examples of these waves, just so you can get a understanding. So here the boat is comparable to the size of the wave, but it can still go up and down because the rise time is not too fast. And in the next example, you'll see the rise time is much faster. As Dan mentions, when the wave hits the shore, it will rise up and become a very sharp edge. So this is what happens. And the power in the wave is increased when the rise time is faster. So there's no way the boat could ever make it up that wave. So that shows you the importance of the rise time.
When he's talking about this frequency domain analysis, think of the first day we're at Millard Fillmore Hospital and we're analyzing Foster Perry's heart to see when he's sending love. We took a frequency signature, the EKG, and see the harmonics, and we learned when he was sending love. That's what we're going to introduce with realheartcoherence.com later with Patrick, that concept. Is frequency analysis.
And the very next talk.
Yeah. Oh, yes, okay. Yes.
So this is an example of a small object on a larger wave where it can ride it, and it doesn't really matter what the rise time is because they're so small, they can always stay upright. Okay, so here are some examples of what can happen when you have different frequencies traveling at different speeds. So these are multi-frequency waves. So here, there's 4 different situations. The group velocity is the wave packet. They call that the wave packet. So I don't know if you've seen this before. The purple dot represents the wave packet. That's the group velocity. The green dot represents phase velocity, where you follow just one peak of the wave. And so to analyze waves of with multiple frequencies, it gets a little bit complicated to describe the velocity.
But in a sense, we're saying the electron is a wave packet. That's the point. And also that envelope on the carrier wave is how Patrick analyzes long waves in the second frequency.
So you can see there the group velocity is faster than the phase velocity. In the second one, the group velocity is 0, so that's a special condition. Over here, you have a negative group velocity, and the phase velocity is positive. So those are in opposite directions. That can happen. And then here you have a 0 phase velocity with positive group velocity. So these are all different things that can happen.
But could you animate how recursive constructive heterodyning of phase velocities causes gravity?
Yes.
I'll get to that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Not in this talk. Not quite there yet.
Well, it's good. We got the concept. Very beautiful animations. I love it.
Okay, so we're going to move on to shock waves. Shock waves can typically happen in 2 different ways. One is with a nonlinear medium, that's called a parametric shock wave. Or the other way is if you have a supercritical flow. So supercritical flow is a term used in water waves, where the speed of the object moving through the water is going faster than the wave speed in the water, which means the wake doesn't have enough time to get out of the way, so it builds up. And we'll show more examples of that.
Like a sonic boom, maybe.
Yes. So the wave in the Teslatron can move faster than light because of the way that the waves cancel and constructively interfere, and we'll talk more about that later. One of the questions is it creating a supercritical ether flow? Is it actually causing the ether to move faster than light? And I think it is. The other method, the Teslatron, also has nonlinear elements, which is the plasma.
So the faster light component, we're hypothesizing, has a lot to do with the longitudinal component. Because it heterodynes that way. Remember, we said 1.618 times the speed of light has been measured. And Obolensky's specialty was measuring when it went faster than light. He didn't get to 1.618. That was that's been done.
Mm-hmm. So I just mentioned that plasma is the nonlinear element, and this shows you the graph of the current versus the voltage in a plasma. So these are different regions that the plasma can operate in. And every time the spark gap fires, the plasma has to go through all of these different modes to arc. This is like your typical lightning bolt way over here. But before the arc occurs, it's over here. So you have to go through all this, and that's not a straight line, so that's a nonlinear relationship. So that shows plasma is the nonlinear element.
Imagine Daniel Breakthru, two near-death experiences, wrote all the books on what to do after death from lightning, and he was a superconductor, and he could, you know, feel everybody's emotions. So he needed to study that. And just what happened to him. That lightning bolt was mindful.
Okay, so now a actual animation of these two different types of shock waves and how they form. Air is a nonlinear medium naturally, and what that actually means is loud sounds compress the air to a higher density, and higher density air propagates waves faster. So in this case, you have a higher pressure at the peak of the wave, and that compresses the air. So that makes the wave speed faster only at that location. Over here, it's still going to be slower, so the peak of the wave catches up to the bottom of the wave. And that's another way to increase the rise time that we talked about.
It's like a sound wave in air versus a sound wave in water, or why do you see a rainbow when a lightning with some water making it?
The other type is...
Does that wave create a break like on the ocean? Does it magic crest?
I'm not sure. I would argue that it does. It carries some amount of the fluid or the medium with it, and that can have inertia, and it will hit you, and yeah. So the other type is the supercritical flow, when an object is moving close to the speed of the waves in the medium. This is an example of a bullet moving through air, and that's called a bow shock, where you have a shock wave forming in front of the object, but it doesn't actually touch it. And this is an unbounded condition. We're going to talk later about a guided wave, shock wave, that's coming up soon.
You know how they put that bulb in the front of a ship to reduce the resistance of water? Because it will fit the shock wave.
Yes. So planes also have points to avoid having this happen. And this is an example of the waves that are created by an object that's moving through the medium at a subcritical speed. This is less than the speed of the waves. And next you're going to see the critical speed, which the object is moving at the speed of the waves in the medium. So the wave speed and the object are moving at the same velocity. So here you see all the wave fronts pile up, and that's what forms the shock wave. So as you approach the speed of the waves, that's what happens.
And when the waves concur at the front with precise geometry, that's called conjugation.
And this is the supercritical condition where the waves actually are all behind the object. Okay, so shock waves as it relates to Guy Obolensky and his mentor, Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw worked on a classified project. It's now unclassified. It's called Project Squid with the U.S. Air Force. They were testing toroidal vortexes that were supersonic. So this was an air medium, and they were experimenting with soliton waves and toroidal donut rings. So everyone knows that. The imploder is a good example. You want to?
I just want to mention that this is a mechanical application of this principle. This was actually a very long, like a gun barrel, very, very long, with a powerful piston pushing the air out. And this, 300 horsepower single cylinder chamber that would send this shock wave out the end of this long tube. When it got to the end, it created this toroidal vortex, and this would alternate back and forth. And a successive train of those would catch up at a certain determined point, and that's where the energy was released, and it was a weapon, basically.
They would implode there, essentially.
Yeah.
The perfect vortex is always the metaphor, whether it's water or air. And if the vortex is perfect, then at the tip, waves can conjugate, and you get that potential longitudinal and superluminal component, but also you get this ability to compress. And
I should mention just quickly so we don't have to go back to it, that Guy was brought back. They continued the project with Guy after Shaw passed away, because Guy had done most of his experiments. He'd set them up and did them.
John, can you say what
Yeah.
a soliton wave is?
Oh yeah, that's going to be next. We have a lot on that. The thing to remember here, though, is the wave changes the medium that it's moving through. And that's very important.
And Shaw emphasized the negentropic concept there as well?
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So in this case, they talk about a Mach disk effect, which you can look up. I haven't looked up much about that yet, but he says that behind the shock wave, there's a compression zone.
Which is conjugate, and we know that's potentially negentropic. So
It is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is an alternating spin a counter rotating?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just like Dan's device here.
Every electron
Doing-
wave envelope, if electron's a wave packet, obviously it only stands as wave if it's going both ways.
So it's a
just
smoke ring that goes this way and back and
Yeah. The only way a violin string works as well, Georg. Oh no, sorry.
So soliton waves are a pretty general term. It covers a lot of different things. It's just a self-reinforcing wave packet that maintains its shape, and it kind of acts like a particle. So this is where I believe that all particles are actually waves, and they're soliton waves, which is the same thing. A toroidal vortex is a soliton wave. Smoke rings, bubble rings, things like that. These are caused by balancing the nonlinear and the dispersive effects. So we already talked about the nonlinear aspect, where the wave changes the medium that it's traveling through. That's a nonlinear effect. Dispersion is where different frequencies travel at different speeds. So the wave shape will change as it propagates.
Where the nonlinear is the part that potentially makes it hang together and become
Mhm.
a soliton.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so when they're balanced, the wave gets locked in place and it doesn't change its shape.
It's like saying physics might have finally figured out what causes something to be centripetal.
So these soliton waves occur in many different situations. Some examples that are typical to everyday life is traffic jams and waiting lines. And those are a little bit of a stretch, but it does give a good example. In water, we already talked about these vortexes, tsunamis are solitons. Rogue waves, that's a little bit different. Tornadoes, hurricanes, and specifically in the Theraphi, plasmoids, it can occur in plasma also. It doesn't matter what the medium is, the waves occur the same way.
In that ghost we showed leaving the body yesterday, you could call that a plasmoid, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So let's study this because that's the way out.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to skip that first one. But this shows how a traffic jam actually happens. This is a phantom traffic jam where, you know, when you get to the end and nothing's actually there. Anything that causes the cars to slow down a little bit will cause a pileup, and then the soliton wave will propagate backwards.
It could be a pretty girl on the side.
Yes, could be anything.
An hour ago.
So this is another good experiment people did with cars in a circle, which is interesting to think about. In electrical analogy, you could do this too. So you can see that the cars only move forwards, but the wave propagates backwards. And that's a property that we're going to talk more about later. So you see here.
Oh, yeah.
But the cars only actually move forwards. Do we have sound on here? So the next example is going to be vortexes and bubble rings. And this is a conventional physicist. I think he's at Cambridge who studies soliton waves.
It's very similar to the bubble. And objects like these may just hold the key to one of the most important problems in physics.
And he works with quarks. I don't really care about quarks, but...
My job is to understand beautiful things.
Turn up that on your computer, John?
Oh, yeah.
One of the nice things I can see is that the bubble room you see and the world of water, the vortex, the field when you pull the pod, are just examples of the same object. The bubble room is a whirl of water that is joined together to form a circle. Us physicists have a name for these. We call them solitons. The name comes from the unique solitary nature of these objects.
So that's just to show that physicists get excited about these things too. Okay, so here's probably the most important example. And this is going to show a example in water where the object is moving faster than the velocity of the waves.
Complex hydrodynamic phenomena. They are rarely observed in typical operating conditions and require several key factors for their generation. Solitons are generated by a vessel operating at critical through depth in a restricted waterway.
You don't need to worry about the math.
Upon generation, solitons travel ahead of the vessel at supercritical speeds and have a form such that they can travel large distances with little change in speed or amplitude if the conditions remain consistent. Here we can see a towed model in a channel traveling in the transcritical through depth region that was continuously generating solitons. The maximum speed of a wave is limited by the depth of the water it is traveling in. The deeper the water, the faster the wave can travel. This allows tsunamis to travel at very high speeds across deep oceans. Through depth is a relationship between vessel speed and the depth of the water. If a vessel is traveling at a critical through depth of 1, it is going the maximum speed of the wave it is generating. The vessel operating in the subcritical through depth region, which is less than a through depth of approximately 0.7, will produce what is known as a Kelvin wave. The subcritical region is where the majority of vessels operate, as few have the power to overcome the resistance encountered in the transcritical region.
So that shows the speed of the object versus the speed of the waves, approaching the speed of the waves at 1.
And when a through depth of 0.7 is exceeded, the wave begins to diverge away from the vessel. As the vessel approaches a critical through depth of 1, it produces a wave of translation due to the maximum wave speed. If this energy is contained, such as in a channel,
so the wave has to be guided for this to happen.
Ahead of the vessel in the form of soliton waves.
That's a great film.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
He shows a real example too,
Yeah, very helpful.
right here.
Whilst generating solitons, the vessel also undergoes a dynamic oscillatory response. Shown here is the dynamic trim of the model, fluctuating as each soliton generates and disperses ahead of the model.
Later you can use this idea to see why even a carbon fiber can be a superconductor, because the diameter of the electron is a multiple of the diameter of the tube it's traveling in. So when it becomes the right diameter waveguide, suddenly it's a superconductor.
Yep. So my opinion is, and this is Guy Obolensky's opinion also, is that the Teslatron creates these superluminal soliton waves electrically.
I mean, if the longitudinal is bouncing around phase coherently inside, you definitely could get a centrifugal construction.
So this is just a comparison of the words that people use in air, water, and the ether, which is sound waves, hydraulic waves, and electrical waves. They use the words supersonic for air. Pretty much everyone knows that. Supercritical flow is the same thing in water. Superluminal is the same for electrical waves, which I consider being in the ether.
But that implies the speed of light is the wave speed in the ether. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? Doesn't answer the question why.
No. Just definitions. So we all know the terms.
When Freud's number is less than 1, it is classified as subcritical and indicates that a wave on the surface of a fluid moves upstream. When Freud's number is lower than 1, it is supercritical and indicates the wave moves downstream. When Freud's number equals 1, it is critical, meaning the wave moves at the same speed as the fluid. This is generally the case with tsunamis.
Okay.
When Freud...
So these ones are more for fun, but they show some very important wave dynamics. I'll play this one first.
Dan, this is the one I wanted to show you on the right.
Oh, yes, the donuts imploded.
You see those toroids that form at the ring?
So I consider this as what particle physics really is, and when they collide particles and they find all these little other particles coming out, that's what I think is actually happening.
Yeah. And we have an analysis in smoke rings where when the toroid dissembles in smoke, they actually form 7 smaller ones at the 7 spin axes of the tetra.
These have to be aligned perfectly.
Yeah.
In order for this to work.
Just like conjugation.
Should count those.
Yeah. So when a toroid dissembles itself in one plane, you can get 7 smaller donuts actually in the axis of spin of the tetra, which is the physics of why the human heart muscle has the 7 layers, exactly the 7 tetra, and the origin of balance. Very cool. It all came from this.
So the next one is a different type of converging wave,
Here we are
which is in water.
That's in Scotland, Dan. Well, thanks. Yeah. Here we're at the Flow Wave Research Facility at the University of Edinburgh in this giant wave pool. It's about 82 feet across and it's got 168 individual little wave pusher paddles. It's capable of creating hundreds of different types of waves found in nature for various testing purposes, but with the simultaneous activation of all of the pushers, you can create one giant spike wave right in the middle, and that's what we're going to get in slow-mo. We've waited for the water to settle because apparently that's the best to get the optimum large spike, because any sort of disturbance in the water dissipates the energy. Oh, you can see the movement. Whoa! Whoa! That was really good. That was really good. I liked how clear it was in the middle. That is so weird looking.
They conjugated. Schauberger had images like that, naturally occurring.
It looks like someone's just pulling on space-time. Yeah. Oh, that's satisfyingly clear.
So you can begin to see the energy of waves.
Like, you know when you drop like one single droplet in water and it just goes, yeah, it looks like that on a massive scale.
Later when we talk about stargates and portals, think of that.
It was like briefly a magnifying glass.
And the important thing at the beginning was they wanted to wait for the water to be as still as possible so they could get the best convergence.
Otherwise it would be destructive interference.
Is that the same as implosion?
I don't think it is because they're not really having any vortexing and the angle.
The pulse wave that leaves that goes faster than light got to go faster than light because of that principle, the constructive interference of the phase velocity.
It's like a laminar flow in 360 degrees instead of straight.
Came to a point. Did you make your point?
So the next section is about transmission lines. So from the previous example, you need to guide the wave to create the faster than light solitons. So you have 2 different types of transmission line, and in our case, it is a longitudinal transmission line which has capacitance in series. So that means anytime you have 2 pieces of metal that are isolated from each other, that's a capacitor. And when the capacitance is in the same direction as the wave, that's this type of transmission line. The opposite is this one. So one propagates transverse waves and the other propagates longitudinal waves, but usually they will occur together. They have very opposite properties. So sometimes, well, not sometimes, the conventional scientists call these a right-handed line and a left-handed line. In this case, waves propagate forwards. This case, waves propagate backwards. And we're going to show an example of what that means. So here's a simulation I actually did, and it shows that a left-handed transmission line, which propagates longitudinal waves, the source is over here, and the wave phase velocity is propagating in reverse. The energy goes forwards, but the wave moves backwards. So I like to think about that like a tractor beam. Energy gets sent out, but it's actually pulling things in towards itself. So you could imagine a surfer could ride on this wave to the source.
Is that like electromagnetics versus voltage?
No, voltage is simply pressure, temperature is simply the flow. But if you map the pressures here, the wave itself is going forward, but the envelope is going backwards. Is that right, John?
Is this the same as what Schauberger saw when he saw the water flow one way and the energy going back the other?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're going to try to show that on the Theraphi tonight.
When they talk about time reversal and longitudinal. But remember that longitudinal transmission is fairly well understood in transmission line electrical engineering. But John, would you agree that longitudinal propagation is fairly well understood in transmission line engineering, but longitudinal propagation in space is not well understood at all.
Right. That's where the conventional science is not working.
We don't even know how to pick it up or to make it.
Yeah.
We don't know how to make a longitudinal wave or to pick it up in conventional physics. I mean, that's a detail.
Right. So,
and yet that's how you get immortal. Hello.
when you have the two transmission lines combined, they have their own resonant frequencies. So if you balance the two frequencies of the forwards wave and the backwards wave, you get a very special condition called a zero-order resonance, where the wavelength is infinitely long and all points along the line resonate coherently. So they all move together.
That's very important. If you really just understood that, man. Zero-point energy, portals, implosion points, longitudinal grid waves.
So the next part, we pretty much went through all the main aspects of the Teslatron, except the person. The person is coupled into the system. They're sitting in a high humidity chamber, so there's a lot of water vapor in the air. And when the soliton waves come through, they charge the the water with a negative charge, and the water vapor is structured because it's a polar molecule, and the wave trains keep hitting it, and so it builds up a structure in the water. And different people have come up with theories on why it is beneficial for the body. I don't really understand a whole lot about the biology aspect, but these are the main people that talk about it, and especially Tom Bearden in these two books are very important. I think Dan might have mentioned it yesterday.
We talk about it all the time.
This one specifically is very important to understand phase conjugation. Tom Bearden is one of the best ones to explain that. Yep.
Okay, so what does all this mean for healing? And by the way, we conspired to have Glenn follow our talk because he is going to, I'm going to transition to what Glenn's going to talk about as far as the biology that we just mentioned. So what we had, most of this talk has been about how you build up the energy to create the shock waves. Obolensky's machine used these bunched solitons to just push it on through. This is, I'm going to speed it up a little bit here because we're running out of time, but the shock wave, it was by Shaw, did an experiment in the 50s where they were doing the hydrogen blasts in the South Pacific. They built a tunnel 2 miles long out of plywood. They filled it with helium. They had one end was facing the blast, and they had atmospheric sensors all the way through. And this was one of Shaw's big experiments. When the shock wave went through, they discovered that that uniform ambient environment of the helium, uniform helium, they discovered negative entropy, an ordering force in the wake of the shock wave. So this had always intrigued Guy, and he built this machine to mimic that with spark gaps and building up the energy and creating a spin. Because let me just jump to the similarities between the Teslatron and the Theraphi. We're both using electron spin in the glass vessels of the Theraphi, and we have a spinning effect in the Teslatron that, again, comes out to the emitter. On the Teslatron, it's a dish about this big, and that is basically a representation of it right there. And what happens is the importance of water, which is a very high dielectric constant, and it's filled with what? Hydrogen. And this interacts with the body. And a lot of good things happen. You know, the creation of negative ions, plus the shock wave going through creates this negative entropy or restoring order in the body itself. So the time-reversed wave you'll see that goes from your body back into the emitter is correcting whatever is wrong in your body. And we've seen that countless times. Did you see that too? The beams coming out. It's an immediate resonance, so it doesn't look like it's coming out of you. You don't see that.
It's like playing cat's cradle with the plasma on your fingers like this.
So with every reversal, it's correcting, just like they do for targeting lasers.
But in phase conjugate optics, when they named it time reversal, what they mean primarily is negentropy, because you cannot time reverse toward disorder, only toward order. Mm-hmm. So that's very important. The concept of time reversal here actually mostly means increased order. Yeah. I only have a few minutes left. Are there any questions about this particular part of it?
Well, the hydrogen in water is 99% of it's covalently bound to oxygen. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure this analogy is...
Actually, but the hydrogen's electron geometry is profoundly fractal.
Yeah, we're atomic hydrogen.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, but that applies to all atoms, surely.
Yes,
not just hydrogen.
No, actually, the hydrogen radii, that was my equation.
Yeah, but...
And that's the fractality of the hydrogen center of water, and we're taking up your time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have 5 minutes left, and I do want to tell you, because Preston Nichols is another fascinating guy. That's, by the way, that's Guy. This is many years ago, and I'm not wearing the same shirt. What we're doing there, my eyes are closed on the right because we're testing his phaser ballast for high intensity lighting, for which he got a patent. And it was getting so bright, I had to close my eyes because it was right above us, above us. Just one aspect of the phaser principle, which doesn't apply necessarily to the healing part. So anyway, thank you, John. Can you put up Preston?
Mm-hmm. Skip Preston. The ether flows.
That's out of his van, which was like a CIA van. He had every communications antenna and everything on it. He used to drive to Montauk and detect all of these signals at Montauk Base, which is just Google the Montauk project.
And the Deca Delta antenna.
Yeah, Delta T. Yeah. And that's him at one of the shows, just relaxing, listening to the music going on. Okay, scroll down. His machine consisted of 4 transducers. They were like loudspeakers because of the coils inside. And the mind amp was putting out like this. Like 2 speakers in front, putting out white noise, because white noise statistically correlates to 50% of everything. And that's how he decided he was going to couple to it.
Inclusive.
Right. Now, and diagonally opposed were transducers in the rear that were headphone transducers. in a certain array, and they were used as microphones. So the idea was out of the front transducers, and this is with the special tube amplifiers that I'll get to next. The idea would be that the white noise would go through, pick up your biofield in the center, the 90-degree cross, because these are in the corners, and you're sitting in the middle. And that's what Duncan Cameron is doing there. This is Duncan, who also recently passed away. He was the man who sat in the Montauk chair. He was a psychic, and he was a collaborator with Preston for a very, very long time. And that's him actually at one of the United States Psychotronics Association conferences where we demonstrated that. Mind amplifier. So anyway, the rear transducers pick up the white noise with your biofield and send it back to the front and feed it back into the amplifier. And this builds an oscillation, and it's happening crosswise, and you're sitting in the middle.
I think it was the principle that any frequency your body damped and presented resistance to would then be amplified, so that effectively learning which harmonics your body would not transmit was then fed back to you, because that was amplified until you could pass them all.
Well, my understanding is the mind amplifier just built up your own mind field, your biofield, and then he developed a sound system, which we are now going to do some work with again, that put music through, like this. The rear transducers pick up the sound, the music, whatever is in that recording, because Tom Bearden once said...
Well, that was the Baytar, but that's the point. I think Bearden and Nichols were on the same track.
Oh, yeah.
Your body, when you really relax, all frequencies go through, including audio. And whatever part is you stressed is indicated by what frequency does not go through. So your body acts as a filter for the sound, but then the missing frequency that arrived back at the sensor is then amplified. So you're fed back exactly what your body is not ready to transmit.
No, right. Okay.
That's Baytar, right?
That's the Baytar, which is more of a healing device. This is really an entertainment device. It opens up your windows to the other worlds if you sit in it long enough. Anyway, the music gets picked up in the rear. So the music and your biofield now are mixed together, sent back around like the mind amplifier. And that builds up. And what Tom was saying, that if you record everything in the universe, when you make a recording, the entire universe is recorded. And that would include the emotions of the musicians, the intentions of the recording engineers, perhaps people in the audience. It gets all picked up. And a lot of that is emotional content. Don't forget the emotional reactions too get picked up. And those get amplified and mixed with your biofield, or your own mind field, if you will. And so this, what he's got his hand on there was just an early version of a transducer. I don't have any pictures of his latest machine before he passed away.
I think it's inspirational. He called it decadelta because it's octahedral, and effectively the wave array became octahedral, whether it was antenna or audio here.
Yes, he had actually, Preston's last version had 6 speakers.
Yeah, exactly.
2 on the side, 2 in the front, 2 in the rear.
Octahedral, precisely.
Now, the amplifiers were designed specifically to extract that higher order electromagnetics, which was presumed where the emotion and the intentions were, and extract it out in vacuum tube only circuits. And he did a talk in '86, which is the first time I met him at the USPA conference, titled The Geometry of Vacuum Tubes. So you can go to the USPA, US Psychotronics, what's called psychotronics.org, and order some of Preston's lectures and really get filled in on this, because he goes into some technical detail too.
And the thing was that amp was actually amplifying whatever frequency did not pass.
Oh yeah, go to the next. Yeah, actually, John's reminding me there's a few more pictures here. So that's, now that on the left device is just simply a laboratory type loudspeaker, self-powered, with vacuum tubes and some of the rack equipment, because Preston collected a lot of surplus gears.
Remember what Paul was saying about the vacuum tube can be full spectrum, whereas once it's digitized, you're losing all kinds of stuff.
Now, I have spent not only many hours in Guy Obolensky's machine, but like here on the left, that was, again, at one of the conferences where he brought the mind machine, mind amplifier, and I sat in it too many times. And you do get this very heightened sense, like you would with a very deep meditation. It just opens you up. A lot of psychics in the audience were asked if they could pick up anything. Duncan there was asked to think of something, and psychics in the audience were asked if they could figure out what it was while he was concentrating on it in mind. It was building up this field. And many did.
Telepathy was amplified.
They could detect it, yeah.
That's what Cozy Rev did, too.
And they also mentioned that it was opening up their own channels. So.
Because the Cozy Rev's mirrors, microwave coherence, does that same thing. It bends a lot.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah. I want to get one of those.
It's a metal cylinder.
I know, it's just a metal cylinder.
Microwave, too.
Didn't you say that metal cylinder?
Yeah. But Paul, the analog for Theraphi would be if you could pick up which impedance, which frequencies the body was impedance damping in the center of the field, and feed back what they had resistance to. And that can be done in audio or optical.
Yeah.
And Mary Soul did that too with voice analysis.
Right.
Pick up the missing frequencies, feed that back.
Yeah.
Could do it manually.
And so this is, the quantify is the beginning stage of this whole thing, so the idea is to have it
Exactly.
able to incorporate all these things.
Yeah, pick up the missing frequency and amplify the missing frequency.
Right, and there are other aspects to the amplifier design that are very important to this, which I know. I actually own a pair of his amplifiers. They're probably the only ones existing, and we're going to work with those.
I talked with Beard quite a bit about behind F.A.S.E.R or analog.
Now, do you have more slides?
No, that's the end.
So maybe a few minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. John, really, particularly wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you for coming back, Allan.
So a couple of questions.
I guess we explained it so well.
You can ask questions later, you know, we'll be around.
Yeah, we'll be around.
Thank you for carrying the memory, really. Those are
Yeah, both of these guys, Guy Obolensky and Preston, were my mentors. And they both passed away in the same year.
There's a question here.
So my question is, what is the situation with the Teslatron? Are you actually
Well, our little group, most of us are here at this conference who are developing a project to put it together. We're going to start manufacturing it very soon. I mean, putting the prototype together.
So you don't have a proof of concept that people have actually used, and you've got testimonials.
Well, we have plenty of proof from Guy's machine.
Yeah,
We're going to do Guy's version, and then maybe we'll take it further.
But you need a special room?
Yes, you do need a chamber.
Like a boudoir shape.
For a lot of
Guy
reasons.
used a boudoir, 8-sided.
Well, again, that, however, that was not the proper version. Yeah, that was the version that some people brought in, and it didn't work.
What's your ideal shape?
Well, it's. I don't know what the ideal shape is, but the machine that worked best, the version, was the one in the basement. I don't know if you ever saw that, but it was a small room.
We'll have slides in next year.
And so you definitely need to channel these waves in a space, and we need to use water.
So what you need
Glenn is going to talk a bit about that.
Not really, I'm talking about the.
Well, talk about water.
How long did
As water relates to the
have that machine going? How many years was the Teslatron in operation?
Oh, well, as far as people coming, and we had many people come. A lot of celebrities. You know, we agreed not to mention who they are, but they are major league tennis players and contemporary, even a few years ago when it was still up and running, and singers. You know, all kinds of celebrities and people. Interestingly, from the NIH, family members of people who are high up in the NIH. You know what that is? National Institutes of Health, and they couldn't even talk about it because, you know, it would get Guy in trouble because he wasn't really, he wasn't a doctor, and he wasn't treating anybody. We don't use that word, or patient. There are people who have been, you know, helped. We have to be concerned about those issues. But it's really a device that balances you just like the Theraphi does, and corrects for any problems you have.
So how many years?
So what happened with the device? Where is it?
5.
It's the device, it's a very long story, but it was a settlement among properties involved with his estate. The machine that Roger just mentioned was part of a deal, and we didn't want to keep that version anyway, and so that was okay. I don't need to go into the details what the deal was.
Machine, because of the estate, got all
Yeah.
confused. But
Yeah.
we've moved on, we're evolving that and refining
Well,
that. So.
Guy took on a partner who kind of sent it in the wrong direction. And so now we're correcting that. And hopefully we'll have it out by next year's conference in Canada.
Come on down. Come on, baby.
There you go, Paul, there's a deadline.
Yeah. That's all I need, the pressure's on. But we'll definitely have some exciting things next year. Physically, because we'll have the space and to do it.
Maybe we'll have the mind amplifier too.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks, guys.